At the bustling gate of JFK's Terminal 5, where voices tangled with flight announcements and the scent of coffee hung faintly in the air, 17-year-old Nia Thompson stood still, one hand clutching her passport, the other holding a sleek boarding pass embossed with three simple, powerful words: First Class, Seat 1A. She glanced down at it with a subtle smile that carried more than pride. It carried proof. Proof that she had earned this, that she belonged. Wearing a soft, navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, her curly hair pulled neatly into a bun, Nia looked composed and focused. But beneath that exterior was a heart quietly pounding. This wasn't just any flight. It was her first solo trip abroad, a reward for winning the prestigious Varden Global Youth Fellowship, a program offered only to the most promising high school seniors in the country. Hundreds had applied. Only 8 had been selected. And now she was heading to Geneva to speak at an international youth summit on innovation and equality. Her father, Julian Thompson, had smiled the night before as he handed her the ticket. "You're not flying first class because you're my daughter," he'd said. "You're flying first class because you're a force, and this world needs to see that." Julian wasn't just a proud parent. He was the founder and CEO of Horizon Air, one of the most respected boutique airlines in the U.S., known for its focus on people before profit. But Nia had never leaned on his name. She had always chosen to let her own accomplishments speak louder than any title he carried. And until this very moment, she had believed they would. She joined the short queue for first-class boarding, standing behind a well-dressed man in his 50s who carried a worn leather briefcase and chatted casually with the gate agent. When it was Nia's turn, the agent smiled, scanned her ticket without hesitation, and gestured her forward. With a nod of thanks, Nia walked the jet bridge with shoulders squared and posture poised, unaware that she was walking directly into the heart of a confrontation that would test not only her patience, but her very sense of belonging. As she stepped onto the aircraft, the air shifted, not just in temperature, but in tone. "Good afternoon, sir," the lead flight attendant said cheerfully to the man ahead of her, her smile warm and easy. But when Nia reached the door and offered her pass, the smile faltered. The attendant's name tag read Melanie, and her eyes flicked over Nia's face, her blazer, her shoes. Something unspoken flashed there, a flicker, fast but unmistakable. Disbelief, discomfort. Nia offered her a calm smile. "Seat 1A, she said simply. Melanie didn't take the boarding pass. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" she asked, the question wrapped in a velvet voice, but heavy with implication. Nia's brow furrowed faintly. "Yes, first class." Another glance. A pause. Melanie stepped to the side and motioned subtly toward the aisle. "Economy continues that way," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Unless this was booked through a corporate program?" Nia blinked. "I'm not with a company. The ticket was purchased directly. It's under my name." The silence between them stretched, awkward and thick. Passengers behind Nia began to queue up, but Melanie didn't move. She leaned slightly toward a colleague and whispered something. A younger attendant approached and quietly asked for Nia's boarding pass. This time, the pass was taken, but instead of being verified and returned, it was scrutinized, as if it were counterfeit. "She's claiming 1A, the second attendant said, not even bothering to lower his voice. Nia stood still, feeling the sudden heat rush to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a familiar ache she had hoped today wouldn't bring. The ache of being questioned for existing in a space people didn't expect her to occupy. She could feel the shift in energy around her. Other passengers now peered down the aisle. One woman furrowed her brow. A man shook his head slightly, as if something didn't sit right, but still, no one said a word. "I'll have to verify this with the gate," Melanie finally said. "Please wait to the side for now." Wait to the side, like luggage, like a mistake. Nia nodded once, slowly. She stepped aside, her face calm, but her fists clenched around the handle of her carry-on. She knew this feeling too well. This wasn't about the ticket. This wasn't about procedure. This was about perception. Her presence had been unexpected, and in the eyes of someone guarding the doors of luxury, that alone made her suspect. She pulled out her phone and texted her father just 3 words. "It's happening again." And as the gate agent returned to reconfirm what was already true, Nia stood taller, not just because she had the right to be there, but because she wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the final few passengers found their seats. The soft chime overhead signaled that boarding had officially closed, and the doors of the aircraft sealed with a muted thud. But in first class, where everything was designed to exude calm and comfort, there remained a quiet unease that hovered just beneath the surface. Nia Thompson had finally taken her place in seat 1A after a tense moment at the entrance where the lead flight attendant, Melanie, had all but suggested she didn't belong. Nia placed her bag gently beneath the seat in front of her and settled back, her boarding pass still resting on the tray table as if it needed to be displayed as proof. She didn't recline, didn't reach for the champagne that was being offered down the aisle. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and exhaled slowly, centering herself. She knew how to survive these moments. She had been taught by years of whispered warnings, of quiet side eyes and coded language. She had learned how to hold her head high while her presence was questioned, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. Across the aisle, a couple seated in 2B and 2C leaned slightly toward each other, their eyes darting to her seat, their conversation quiet but unmistakably about her. Nia noticed, but didn't react. The woman whispered something and gave a small shake of her head, while the man gave a half shrug in return. It was the kind of interaction that said everything without saying much at all. Nia could feel it in the air, that weight of being watched, not with admiration, but with scrutiny. The quiet disbelief that she, a black teenage girl traveling alone, could possibly be occupying the most coveted seat on the plane. Melanie returned down the aisle, a tray of welcome drinks in hand. Her steps slowed slightly as she neared Nia, her posture still too rigid to be sincere. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Would you care for something to drink before takeoff, Miss Thompson, was it?" Her voice bore the edge of forced politeness, like someone trying to mask discomfort behind customer service. Nia nodded, her voice even. "Just water, thank you." Melanie hesitated. "Still or sparkling?" "Still is fine." She poured the glass, handed it over, and paused for a beat too long. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, then added with a pointed softness, "We do want all our passengers to feel comfortable." The words, though crafted to sound considerate, carried a different tone entirely, as if comfort was a privilege that could be revoked if not earned properly. Naya offered a tight smile and turned to look out the window. She wasn't going to argue. Not yet. Not here. As the engines roared to life and the plane taxied toward the runway, Naya's fingers tightened around the armrest. Not from fear of flying. She had flown dozens of times before. But the anticipation of being trapped for 7 hours with subtle antagonism disguised as etiquette was its own form of turbulence. She had seen it in classrooms, in stores, on sidewalks. And now, 35,000 feet in the air, it had followed her again. The ascent was smooth, but the cabin was anything but calm. Melanie made her rounds once more after takeoff, checking on each passenger. But when she returned to Nia's row, she paused again. "Miss Thompson," she said, voice cool, "I'm going to need to double-check your boarding information. There seems to have been some kind of mix-up in the manifest." Nia blinked, stunned. "I already showed you my pass. Twice." "Yes, I understand. But our system didn't update your age, and we typically don't have unaccompanied minors seated in the front row for long-haul flights." "I'm 17, Nia replied, "and I'm not an unaccompanied minor. This seat was booked properly, in my name." Melanie gave her a tight-lipped nod, but the doubt in her eyes remained. She scribbled something on her tablet and walked away. Nia sat still for a long moment. The humiliation stung, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she hadn't. It was a familiar burn, the kind that came when your competence, your presence, your right to occupy a space was questioned for no reason other than who you appeared to be. But this time, something inside her stirred. She had not come this far. Across years of working late nights on scholarship essays, debate competitions, community service hours, and internships, to be made to feel like she had slipped through a door meant to stay shut. She reached for her phone, flipped it open, and read the last message from her father. It was from the night before. "You've earned every bit of this. Never let anyone shrink you." Her lips pressed together, eyes focused now. No, she would not shrink. Further up the aisle, Melanie was whispering to another flight attendant, her expression tight, clearly recounting the moment. A few glances shot back toward Nia's row. One of the attendants furrowed his brow, but nodded. Whatever story was being told, it was building traction. Nia knew the script well. She could feel it coming before it arrived. Sure enough, within minutes, another uniformed crew member approached with a forced air of cordiality. "Miss Thompson, we'd like to verify your reservation with the purser. Just a quick check. Could you please follow me to the galley for a moment?" Nia stood slowly. Her steps were steady, her gaze direct. As she moved down the aisle, she didn't cower. She didn't look away from the passengers watching her, eyes following her like a shadow of doubt. She walked with intention, with presence, because she knew this wasn't just about her seat. This was about visibility, about what it meant to be young, black, and excellent, and how some people weren't ready for that truth to take up space in their carefully curated world. Inside the galley, she was asked again to produce her ID. She complied. They looked it over, passed it back, and still said they needed to cross-reference with the gate record. When she returned to her seat minutes later, her water was gone, replaced by a note scribbled by Melanie that read, "We appreciate your patience." No apology, no acknowledgement of error, just a note. A performance of politeness masking the rod of prejudice. But Naya didn't crumble. She looked at the note, folded it in half, and tucked it into her bag. not as evidence of shame, but of resolve. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. And what the crew didn't know was that Nia Thompson wasn't flying alone. Not really. Her name might not ring alarms yet, but the name of the man who raised her did. And he was just a phone call away. High above the clouds, where calm skies usually meant quiet reflection, there was an unsettling tension wrapped around seat 1A. Nia Thompson sat upright, her back barely brushing the plush leather headrest. Her hands remained folded tightly in her lap, though her eyes were no longer focused on the screen in front of her. Every flicker of a passing glance, every whisper from the crew, every polite smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, it all pressed down like a pressure system ready to break. She hadn't moved since returning from the galley, and neither had the unease that clung to her space like an unwelcome fog. To anyone watching, she might have looked still, composed, quiet. But inside, a fire had started to burn. A slow, steady heat, born from knowing that no matter how perfect she had played the part, it hadn't been enough to earn the most basic assumption of belonging. What they didn't realize, what they had failed to ask, was who she was beyond the surface. Not just a young girl with a calm voice and confident posture. Not just another passenger in designer shoes. Nia was the daughter of Everett Thompson, founder and CEO of Altura Airways, the very airline currently carrying her through the stratosphere. A man known in boardrooms for his steel-willed leadership, and in his daughter's heart for the quiet way he taught her how to hold dignity in a world eager to strip it away. And now, at 35,000 feet, Nia reached for her phone. She didn't hesitate. No dramatic sigh. No emotional outburst. Just the methodical tap of fingers that had typed scholarship essays, drafted speeches, written personal mission statements. The message was short, precise. Dad. They've questioned me again. Removed me briefly from my seat. Said my age and reservation are under review. It's not about policy. It's about perception. Just thought you should know. She stared at the screen, thumb hovering, before pressing send. She didn't expect a response right away. He was always in meetings, fielding calls, managing crisis after crisis with quiet excellence. But Everett Thompson had always answered her calls. 14 minutes later, the reply came. I'm calling the flight deck now. Sit tight. You did nothing wrong. Those last 6 words hit her harder than she expected. You did nothing wrong. She breathed them in like air after a deep dive. It wasn't just reassurance. It was validation. A reminder that the guilt she felt wasn't hers to carry. In the cockpit, Captain Julie Mendoza received the call just as she was double-checking the route across the Atlantic. The voice on the other end of the private, sat phone was calm, but unmistakably firm. This is Everett Thompson, it began. My daughter, Nia Thompson, is on your flight. I understand she's been questioned repeatedly about her seat and status. Captain Mendoza straightened in her seat, suddenly very aware of who she was speaking to. Yes, Mr. Thompson, she replied, professional, but tense. I won't ask for special treatment, he said, but I do expect respectful, lawful treatment. And if my daughter, who booked her ticket properly and is seated according to manifest, has been removed or harassed due to assumptions based on her age or appearance, I want that corrected. Now quietly and thoroughly. There was a pause, the kind that carried weight. And Captain, he added, I'll be waiting at the gate when you land. Personally. The line clicked. Silence returned to the cockpit, but the tone of the flight had irrevocably changed. Within minutes, the message reached the crew. Melanie was summoned to the galley, where the captain met her with a stare that required no preamble. "I just spoke with Mr. Thompson," the captain began. Melanie stiffened. I I didn't realize she was. "It doesn't matter who she is," Captain Mendoza snapped. "It matters how she was treated. And from what I understand, you've made several missteps today, starting with assuming she was in the wrong and ending with involving security procedures that were completely unnecessary." Melanie opened her mouth, likely to defend herself, but the captain raised a hand. "No explanation will undo the damage. What you will do now is apologize, directly, sincerely, and you will offer her the dignity you denied her when she boarded." Melanie swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain." And so, as the cabin lights dimmed for the evening meal, Melanie made her way back to the front row. Her steps were slower now, her posture less rigid. Gone was the air of superiority she had carried like armor. In its place was something that looked, finally, like accountability. "Miss Thompson," she began, voice low, "I want to apologize. There was a miscommunication earlier, and I understand now that the way it was handled may have felt unfair. I'm sorry." Nia looked at her without blinking. There was no warmth in her expression, not coldness either, just clarity. "It wasn't a miscommunication," Nia said quietly. "It was a choice." Melanie flinched slightly, then nodded. "Yes, and I take responsibility. If there's anything I can do." "There is," Nia interrupted. "You can make sure the next person who looks like me doesn't have to explain their presence to earn your respect." Melanie stood still for a moment, unsure what to say. Eventually, she nodded once and stepped back. The cabin returned to quiet, but the air was different now. Nia felt it, not triumph, but truth, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight, just a witness. And she had one. 2 hours later, as the plane neared its descent into Heathrow, Nia glanced out the window, her reflection soft in the glass. She didn't smile, but there was something settled in her eyes now. She had spoken up, stood firm, and stayed composed when everything in her begged to break. But she didn't. She never had. What she didn't know yet was what awaited her beyond the gate. A moment that would turn whispers into headlines, passengers into allies, and a quiet stand for dignity into something much bigger than one girl in seat 1A. The wheels touched down on the runway with a soft jolt, and for a moment, everything inside the cabin was still. The familiar ding of the seatbelt sign turning off echoed through the air, followed by the rustling of passengers retrieving bags and unbuckling with practiced ease. But for Nia Thompson, the landing wasn't a return to normalcy. It was the beginning of something entirely different, a reckoning that had quietly boarded the plane with her and was now preparing to disembark. As she stood from seat 1A, the cabin seemed to move in slow motion around her. Her boarding pass, creased from being held so tightly, sat untouched on her tray table. Her small carry-on remained exactly where she had placed it. And despite the polished finish of first class, despite the soft leather and quiet comfort, Nia walked out of that seat, not with luxury, but with purpose. She didn't rush. Her movements were deliberate, composed, as if every step down the aisle was a reminder, to herself, to those watching, that dignity doesn't yield to doubt. Melanie stood near the galley, eyes lowered as Nia approached. She didn't speak. She didn't offer more apologies. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been shown in the way she had mishandled her authority. Naya gave her a glance, not cruel, not vindictive, just final, and continued forward. The doors opened with a mechanical hiss, and cool terminal air swept in. The jet bridge stretched ahead, empty except for two uniformed airline executives and a tall man in a navy suit, whose presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Everett Thompson was not a man known for dramatics. He led with quiet force, a commanding presence that didn't need volume to be felt. But as he stood just outside the gate, eyes fixed on his daughter, there was something more than just the concern of a CEO or the authority of a founder. There was a father waiting for the daughter he had raised to face the world with grace, and watching now as she returned, carrying not just her luggage, but a truth too heavy for someone her age. Nia stepped off the plane and into his arms without a word. He didn't ask if she was okay. She didn't offer any updates. Their silence said everything. Then, Everett turned to the executives beside him, his jaw firm, his voice calm but sharp. I want to see the crew manifest, and I want a private room to speak with the captain and head of in-flight service. Now. The executives, pale and tense, nodded instantly. Around them, passengers continued to trickle off the plane, many glancing back at the scene unfolding at Gate 16. Some recognized Everett Thompson immediately, his face familiar from magazines, news segments, and Forbes features. Others pieced it together slowly, murmuring to one another, a collective realization swelling in the air. The girl they'd watched being questioned, moved, and quietly humiliated. She wasn't just someone's daughter. She was the daughter. Within 20 minutes, a quiet room off the terminal had been cleared for a meeting. Everett sat at the head of the small conference table, Nia at his right. Across from them were Captain Mendoza, now visibly strained, and Melanie, who seemed significantly smaller than she had only hours before. This isn't about corporate image, Everett began, folding his hands on the table. This is about culture. It's about the assumptions made at 35,000 feet that carry consequences long after the flight has landed. Melanie tried to speak, but Everett raised a hand. I'm not here to shame you. That's not my style. But I am here to make sure this never happens again. Not just to my daughter, but to anyone who doesn't look like your idea of what first class should be. Captain Mendoza nodded solemnly. Mr. Thompson, I understand, and I take full accountability for not stepping in sooner. Words are a start, Everett replied, but action is the currency we're dealing in now. At that, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal, one he had personally crafted with his legal and human resource teams in the time between Nia's text and her arrival. It detailed a new mandatory inclusivity and accountability protocol for all Altura Airways crew, including scenario-based training focused specifically on unconscious bias, real-time escalation policy reform, and anonymous crew evaluations submitted by passengers following each flight. Melanie's eyes scanned the document, her hands trembling slightly. Everett looked at her, his voice gentler now. This isn't about destroying your career. It's about using this moment. Growth doesn't begin with comfort. It begins here, with discomfort, with confrontation, and with the choice to learn. Nia finally spoke, her voice quiet but unwavering. I don't want to be remembered just because I was mistreated. I want this story to matter because it changes something. For someone else, next time. The room fell silent again. Then Captain Mendoza stood, offering her hand to Nia first. You've taught us more than any training manual ever could, she said, her voice thick with sincerity. And I'm sorry for what you endured, for what I failed to question. Nia shook her hand, her expression softening. As the meeting ended, Everett placed a hand on his daughter's back as they walked through the terminal. The crowd had thinned, but whispers still followed them. Whispers not of scandal, but of strength. Passengers who had been silent witnesses were now sharing the story online. A photo someone had snapped of Everett embracing Naya at the gate had already begun circulating with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like," and "She stood tall. So did he." But Everett and Nia didn't linger. They walked out of the terminal with their heads high, not just because of who they were, but because of what they had done. They had turned a gate of exclusion into a threshold of change, and the story was only just beginning to fly. In the days following the incident at Gate 16, the story of Nia Thompson traveled farther than any plane ever could. It was shared over morning coffee in homes across the country, dissected in classrooms, reposted on social media feeds with captions that echoed a common sentiment. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about a moment that peeled back the curtain on the assumptions still buried deep within systems dressed in professionalism and polish. But for Nia, the aftermath wasn't about the viral attention or the headlines that bore her name. It was about what came next. She returned to her daily life, to her classes and study sessions, but something fundamental had shifted. She walked a little taller, not out of pride, but purpose. She now knew, firsthand, how standing still in a moment of quiet injustice could ripple outward and challenge an entire industry to reevaluate itself. Everett Thompson wasted no time. Under his leadership, Altura Airways launched the Fly Forward Initiative, a comprehensive retraining program for all staff, rooted in cultural humility, human-centered service, and situational bias awareness. But more than that, Everett used the moment to push a deeper internal reform, changing not just policy, but perception. From check-in counters to cockpits, conversations about equity became daily practice, not just corporate lingo. Nia was invited to speak at a youth leadership summit in Chicago. She shared her story, not as a victim, but as someone who had seen what dignity under fire looked like. Her voice didn't waver, and her message was clear. Change doesn't start with permission. It starts when we refuse to shrink. After her talk, a young girl approached her, no older than 12, with wide eyes and a soft voice. "My brother said I should always act small in places like that," she whispered. "But you didn't." Nia knelt slightly, meeting her gaze. "That's because we don't belong in the background, and you never have to apologize for taking up space." That moment stayed with her long after the applause faded. It reminded her that the real measure of justice wasn't in policies. It was in the courage it inspired in others. She had walked onto that plane expecting comfort, not confrontation. But she walked off of it having sparked something bigger, a movement. From one seat, an entire airline took a deeper look at its values. From one voice, 1,000 others found the strength to speak. And from one young woman's refusal to be dismissed, a legacy of change took flight. Nia Thompson's journey began as a simple celebration. A teenage girl, full of promise and grace, boarding a plane for the first time alone, flying first class not out of privilege, but out of earned recognition. Her father, Everett Thompson, had raised her to understand that dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you carry. That morning, as she stood confidently at the boarding gate, she was armed not only with a boarding pass, but with the quiet strength of knowing her worth. But within moments, that celebration was marred by an experience far too familiar for many, being judged based on appearance rather than merit. What unfolded on that flight wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a mirror reflecting a broader truth: how implicit biases can turn moments of pride into tests of perseverance. The lead flight attendant, Olivia Marks, didn't ask questions. She didn't verify. She simply looked at Nia and decided she didn't belong. The humiliation of being publicly challenged, her seat questioned, her presence doubted. These weren't just minor discomforts. They were deep, cutting reminders of how easily dignity can be dismissed when power is paired with prejudice. But what made this story unforgettable was how Nia chose to respond. She didn't raise her voice or cause a scene. She stood still. She spoke clearly. She didn't allow someone else's doubt to shrink her sense of self. And when she reached for her phone to contact her father, it wasn't to be saved. It was to ensure that the truth had a witness. Everett Thompson's response was swift and powerful, not just because of his status as the airline's CEO, but because of the message he carried with him. Leadership is about more than titles. It's about standing up when it matters. In front of the entire cabin, he dismantled the illusion of hierarchy and reminded everyone that respect isn't a courtesy reserved for the familiar. It's a right owed to every human being. The ripple effect of that moment traveled farther than any flight path. Policies were rewritten, training programs were launched, but more importantly, conversations began about bias, about perception, and about the silent ways we judge others. Olivia Marks, once so sure of her assumptions, was given an opportunity to face her blind spots, to grow, and to return with a renewed understanding of her role, not just as a flight attendant, but as a gatekeeper of dignity in the sky. And Nia, she didn't let that experience harden her. Instead, it sharpened her. She became a voice for others who had been made to feel small in places where they belonged. She shared her story, not for sympathy, but to ignite strength in others. Her quiet poise in the face of discrimination became a model of how calm resistance can spark institutional change. So, what's the lesson in all this? It's simple, but urgent. Dignity is non-negotiable. Whether in a boutique, a boardroom, or a boarding gate, every individual deserves to be treated as if they belong, because they do. And when that dignity is denied, silence is not neutrality, it's complicity. We all have a role to play, whether we're the ones experiencing injustice, witnessing it, or in a position to change it. We have a responsibility to respond. For those watching, let this be more than a story. Let it be a reminder to speak up when something feels wrong, to question your own assumptions, and to raise children who know their worth so deeply that no one can take it from them. And if this story moved you, if it challenged you, or reminded you of your own moments of quiet resistance, please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that shine a light on what matters. Stories that inspire justice, that celebrate dignity, that remind us all to walk taller. Because in the end, it's not just about reclaiming one seat. It's about creating space where everyone belongs.